So we've got a few, now that we're really getting into award season, there's a few movies we need to talk about. And I also saw Jumanji, because I was curious. But we're actually going to start with All the Money in the World. And there's a lot of interesting things that go into this movie, obviously, but to start off with immediately, it's kind of all about the first impression, and this movie immediately makes one regardless of all the stuff surrounding the creation of it. When it starts off and we get our opening credits scene and we've got like the kind of black and white look and he's just kind of walking the streets, and with the music and everything, I was immediately struck by like almost an immediate, I don't know if this sounds pretentious or not, but there's like an immediate sophistication to this movie. Like, it's one of those movies that it's interesting that it's released in such a time. Obviously it's award season, but I mean, even so, when you look at a lot of the award season movies we have, you have a movie here that's just really gonna 100% play itself seriously, and for some reason that seems to be a bit of a rarity these days. Not that obviously, you know, movies with a lighter side should be damned or anything like that, but it just felt like we hadn't seen a movie like this in a little while, or at least one that does it in a way that works so quickly and so immediately when you sit down in front of it. So I was immediately pulled in by that. And then we obviously go into our story, which obviously is a true story, but I really didn't know much of anything about it. The only way I really know this the story of this family is that they are connected to the actor Balthazar Getty, and then we kind of go back from him. But then I kind of, as the movie was making more news, I started to get a feel of what the actual story was, and it actually became quite intriguing based solely on its premise, let alone the production of it. So, because obviously there's the elephant in the room of the fact that I guess I can't really say was, because nothing's really changed as far as what has already happened in his career. For the longest time, I've considered Kevin Spacey to be my favorite actor, so I was really looking forward to this movie back then, pretty much based solely on that. So, so obviously there was kind of a snowball effect in regards to my ultimately excitement for this movie, and so yeah, it did leave a bad taste in my mouth at first when the studio and Ridley Scott decided to make this drastic decision to remove him entirely and replace him with Christopher Plummer. Even though, and the fact that this would be like, initially when somebody asked about it in an awards video, I responded by saying that if the performance is done, it should stay the way it is. But the more it goes on, and obviously the more that came out, and it seems to still kind of somewhat continue to trickle out, but just in Spacey's case alone, you can understand completely where the decision comes from. And it's ironic because Ridley Scott was talking about how he actually was already considering Plummer very much, but the studio wanted somebody a bit more bankable, and they thought that was Spacey because of the popularity of House of Cards, and that it was kind of a similar, the characters kind of have a similar ruthless attitude. And then I thought it was also not necessarily a great idea because they were trying to save their reputation but also be bankable by making this decision, yet I don't know if this is actually what it came to, but like around the time it was happening, apparently the number that came out was $10 million. It was going to cost $10 million to reshoot Spacey scenes with Plummer. And it was like, is it worth it at this point? And yeah, I suppose it gives the movie, you know, an integrity now that it might not have had. I had heard that, and this actually happened to me too, with Murder on the Orient Express, when the trailers started playing that still had Spacey in them, the crowds were not reacting greatly. There was actually at the theater, I looked on my way out, the poster outside of my theater is the one that still has Spacey's name on it. So, you can't really see it from a distance, so you have to get like really up close, but it's a bit amusing actually. But so going into this, it was kind of like, well, yeah, Plummer does seem like more of a fit for the role because he's there age-wise, and it really, like, it's one of those cases where once he was cast, it was kind of like, well, yeah, I suppose that makes perfect sense, actually, as opposed to burying Spacey in makeup. And yeah, that makeup didn't exactly look entirely convincing, but I was still really amped up to see a Spacey performance like that, regardless of what was going down. But once you actually see it, it's kind of the case of there was clearly going to be two different performances here. Plummer specifically said that he did not watch the Spacey footage before he shot his stuff. And I think it was implied that Ridley Scott would not have let him anyway if he wanted to. So, to really get some kind of change here, and you can definitely tell, because I went back and I watched the trailer footage of Spacey, what very, very little we had. And even with just that very little, you can tell that Plummer went in a totally different direction. And the interesting thing about this character is the way that he's so ruthless and grandfatherly at the same time, especially in the flashback scenes. And these flashback scenes actually work real. Like, you would think, usually, I was talking about this with The Greatest Showman, it's like, usually a movie is bogged down when you interrupt its story for flashbacks. But the flashbacks play a really important part in this movie, and they're actually some of the strongest scenes in the whole movie. From the way they're shot, they look like they're really beautifully shot, and they almost look like you're looking at memories as opposed to just generic flashback scene number 1, 2, and 3 or whatever. And in the way we introduce his character, where we kind of go back and forth, because at first we don't get a huge grasp on the ruthlessness of his nature, because we get to see it. I mean, obviously we get that there's a distance between him and his son, but then once they're actually together as a family, he is very kind of straightforward when he tells Michelle Williams, like, you know, you're no longer part of your family, you're our family now. But Plummer has a way about him to make that very kind of pushy attitude, or what, if that's how you want to put it, where it still seems like it's not necessarily sinister. It's just his character, but there's nothing particularly malicious. And then we do kind of get that vibe when we go forward, especially with the decisions he makes. But once again, because we know this is a guy that is like so cheap. He was talking about how there was a figurine that he bought from somebody, and he bought it for $13 when it was set at $19, and he apparently he negotiated with the guy for an hour to go down $6, and this is a guy with literally all the money in the world. And that scene alone just tells you everything you need to know. But then you get to this point, the big turning point, when he says that he's not going to pay the ransom. And where I feel like Spacey probably would have played it up more or less like a villain, pretty much. Plummer has this way about him to where when he explains it, you kind of see the logic. Because he just very calmly says, you know, if I pay millions of dollars to some kidnappers because they have my grandson, I have a whole bunch of other grandchildren, they're just going to take them and everybody will think they can get millions of dollars. And it's like, at first you think, yeah, that's your grandson, though. But then at the same time, it's like, wow, he's got kind of a point. And then it's... and he just has that way of, like, sucking you in like that. But the movie does also... Like, the movie... It's not necessarily like the movie's trying to get you to take his side. It's really not. But in that moment, Plummer kind of gets us... And we can't kind of see it, but I mean, overall, obviously... the story points us in the direction of this motherfucker needs to get the money out because he's fucking got it. And this kid could die, and it would be on him. And he seems to almost care less and less the more the movie goes on. And it's definitely some really strong stuff. And once again, I know that it probably seems almost like an unintended gimmick. For acclaim, because you see, like, Plummer getting a Globe nomination, or Ridley Scott getting a Globe nomination for that matter, and it's like, is that for the quality of the movie as a whole, or is it the story of they did this really fast, and it looks totally competent. It's like they did that, and it didn't come out messy, and that alone is award worthy. But it doesn't really just stop there. They've got some really good stuff together. It's really just the cherry on top that they did it under the constraints that they did with the time. They only bumped the release date by 3 days. It was supposed to come out the 22nd, and they pushed it to Christmas. That's it. And they were to pull this off, and it's there. You might wonder while watching it, is it going to be distracting knowing all this stuff? Because it's like, you see moments where, like, we have a scene where Plummer, Wahlberg, and Williams are in the same room, but sometimes the camera's just on Wahlberg and Williams while Plummer's talking, and you kind of find yourself thinking, so is that shot from the reshoot, or did they just take the Spacey scene and put Plummer's voice over it? Or the moments when, like, one of the flashbacks, he's walking in silhouette with the young Paul, and it's like, so is that silhouette Spacey, or did they go through that much trouble to replace a silhouette? And yet you can even tell sometimes the silhouette is indeed Plummer, because you can, by the way he turns his head, you can tell. And it's also kind of like you're watching the scenes with Plummer, because usually when you watch a movie, you know, oh, this movie was shot like a year ago. It was like a year ago they did all this stuff. So it's like, it's so weird to watch the Plumber scenes, and it's like, this was so recent. They shot this like last month. And so you kind of got that going in your head, but it's never enough to be distracting. It does give you more, like, wonder towards the movie, and it does give you a certain appreciation for it, and kind of a unique experience because of it. But it's really not that distracting, because once those thoughts are in your head, they go right back into... They don't take you out of the scene or anything, because they're put together so seamlessly, which is really impressive. So I honestly would not be surprised if... I saw somebody the other day predicting that Ridley Scott gets a DGA nomination. That would not be surprising at all. And I was predicting Plumber last video, I still am, even though we're not doing that for another almost few weeks, but that's out there now. So yes, and so just the whole thing just has kind of a surreal quality to it. And another thing that kind of makes it really impressive is that when they were talking about how they were doing this, I was under the impression that Getty was not a character that was in it very much. So it's like, oh, we can just cut these scenes out, redo them, the end. He's in it a lot. He's in it a lot more than I thought. I don't know if they beefed it up and gave Plummer more scenes than Spacey had or not, but and I wouldn't think they'd make that decision with the small window they had, but yeah, it all came together very nicely. And like I said, they do very much... Plummer, I think, definitely had much more of a grasp on... I still... will be very interested to see what Spacey did, and I still think this is why the movie works, is that I say Spacey feels like he probably would have played him up as like a straight villain, whereas Plummer found the humanity in him and seemed to play more on that. In this movie, everything else around it, I could see both of these performances working. They just make two totally different movies. And so, and like that, like, once again, there are sinister moments, like when, like, if you pay attention to the score, when they first reunite at the beginning, Getty and his son, and it's like, he's saying, you know, we're a family now. And it's like, this should be some triumphant moment, and it's like, the score is playing it up like it's something really damn sinister. They're part of his family now. And so, yeah, all of that was done almost flawlessly, really. But there's a lot more movie going on. The movie's 2 hours and 12 minutes. Obviously another person in this cast, who also has a Globe nomination now, is Michelle Williams, who is also very good. I can see this performance being an acquired taste, because it is very... she's got some tics and stuff going on, but she still has a lot of great moments. There's obviously her very first scene, when she gets the phone call. She has this really realistic scene of shock and kind of disbelief at what she's hearing on the other side of this phone. That's a great way to kind of show off this character in this performance for the first time and throw us into what she's doing. Sorry. some motorcycle, I guess. So, and then you can see, like, a clear difference. Like, I'm always a sucker for performances that can be one thing and another thing effectively in a way that the story requires. And it's like, she's one person when she's broke, and then she's another when she's rich. It's like even her voice changes. Uh, and so, and once again, though, I don't think it, like most Michelle Williams performances, I think a lot of it works, but there's certainly some questionable choices. But overall, I do think she handles it very well for the most part. And the way she's able to play it believably as somebody that is having something horrible happen to her, yet somehow, even though something horrible has happened to her, the whole world finds a way to, or everybody that at least sees this story has a way of making it going against her. And the way she basically feels like it's her against the world in this situation where it's already something terrible happening to her. I think she plays with really well. And the way that because she's not reacting to this the way people think she should be. So yeah, I thought that she made that work really well. Wahlberg's case, at first I thought Wahlberg was going to be a case of miscasting. Like, I really wasn't sure during the first half of this first scene with him. But overall, he does make it work, especially his bigger scenes. Like, he has one incredibly crucial scene that he sells perfectly, and once again, it's one of the reshot scenes. So it's like, for him to do this scene, and then come back after all that time and have to do it again very quickly under a time constraint, comes off very well. So, I mean, obviously Wahlberg's been impressive for a long time, because Boogie Nights goes back 20 years. But lately it's kind of like a lot of his more serious roles were, I mean, obviously he was the star of my favorite movie of last year, but stuff like the first one that comes to mind is like stuff like Broken City or something, where it's like, no. But he's in a lot of comedies these days too, and I found that, I think that was still throwing me off a little bit, because there is a scene where he's walking with Plummer, and they're having this serious conversation. It's kind of like the introduction to their relationship to each other. And we're kind of getting the feel of how they see each other and how they communicate. And there's one moment when it looks like Wahlberg is going to walk straight into a statue. And then I was convinced it was going to happen. And then I had enough time in my mind to say, oh, wait a minute. Number one, he's not in a comedy. Number two, this is just not a movie that would happen in. So that's what I was talking about, how the movie just plays it very straight. So it was like, it's almost like seeing Wahlberg in all those comedies is kind of, my mindset was still there, so it was kind of hard for me at first to grasp him here, but as he goes on further, I think he really pulled it off. Especially when he really needed to in those big scenes. He also masters, one of my, usually cliches are a bad thing, but this movie has one of my favorite cliches in it. And it's that moment we all know when, somebody is talking to somebody that doesn't speak their prominent language, and then they start kind of insulting them in the other language to another person, and then that person speaks in their language to say, I know what you're saying and I understand you. Yeah, that cliche just always works for me. It's always kind of a fuck yeah moment for that person. And Wahlberg gets to do that in his first scene, so that works too. So, going on, the kidnapping angle. As far as the scenes with Charlie Plummer, who is perfectly named so conveniently, the kidnapping scenes pretty much play up as kidnapping scenes. There's nothing particularly, there's nothing that particularly shakes it up here. I'm not sure what exactly liberties they took to regards to the real story and what we saw here. Usually it's a lot, so it's hard to say, but there's still, even though it does feel like kind of a basic kidnapping movie when we actually see him and the hostage takers, there's still a handful of tense moments when the scene where he sees one of their faces, or there's a scene when I don't really know how to say that without saying too much, but a very intense scene with one of the kidnappers by himself in tall grass brings about a very intense scene as well. So, Yeah, and those are sprinkled throughout on top of the whole kind of background scenes of this whole kidnapping thing playing out with the Getty side of it too. And it all does make an interesting story. And it's also one of those cases where it's one of those movies where it's obviously very long, and we do have those moments where we feel like we're on the home stretch, and then there's another snag. And usually that's pretty annoying, and it makes it feel like the movie's just dragging it out. But this movie kind of earns that stuff enough to where if we think we're headed in the right direction and then a snag happens, we're invested enough to where that snag doesn't make us wish the movie would end sooner. It actually gets us invested, and we want to see a positive outcome even more because of this. Not just the end of the movie. So that was well played as well. But yeah, it does start to wear itself down with like 20 minutes to go. The climax, if you will, is a good scene that kind of keeps the suspense rolling, but even so, for the most part, by the time you get there, you're getting pretty tired, so it doesn't completely hold up like that, but and it probably will remain, regardless of how, you know, intriguing the story is and being this real life story. I do think this movie, as far as its history, will go down as that movie that they changed at the last minute and still were able to pull it off, and that'll be where a lot of the acclaim comes from. But the other stuff that's in there is not to completely go overlooked because it is very well done. But it's just kind of that little extra bit of impressive that it was made under its circumstances, and makes this movie that is a good movie and gives it just a little bit more of a flair. But still, it's just that good movie that never quite reaches greatness, despite the accomplishment that it really is. So yeah. Our second movie is going to be The Disaster Artist. I guess I should preface this with something that's probably not going to have a lot of agreement, especially if you're interested in seeing a review on YouTube for The Disaster Artist. My thoughts on The Room itself, like a lot of people I know are all about The Room. They're all about the quotes, they're all about watching it all the way through. Owen is obsessed with seeing it in a theater for some reason, and they're doing the whole Rocky Horror thing they have been doing for a long time now. I get what Franco is talking about when I see him in interviews talking about his particular kinship with The Room, and the way he describes it as, he describes Tommy Wiseau as a guy that wanted to make this movie and made it happen regardless of what it was. And even when it got the reception that it did, he went around that and kind of changed his perspective on it himself, to make sure it was a movie that everybody would love. And yeah, that is something special from a creative standpoint. But with all that said, I can't fucking stand The Room, and not in that. Obviously, I think I've been made it clear that I'm not a so bad it's good type. Movies are either good, they're good despite criticism, or they're just fucking bad. Obviously, there's plenty of middle ground in there, but point being, hardly will I find a movie I consider so bad it's good. That does not make sense to me. And I think The Room's biggest problem is not Tommy Wiseau's weird-ass performance. It's not the shitty editing. It's not the shitty dialogue. It's not the weird-ass sex scenes. It's not the incomprehensible shit that happens in it. It's not the throwing the football just because thing in tuxedos for no reason. It's not the characters that come and go like nothing. I don't like The Room because it bores the shit out of me. It is so tedious with nothing going on whatsoever. I don't find it particularly funny in its badness whatsoever. I'm not one of those people where if you just say, "Oh, hi, Mark," or one of the random quotes, that is not funny to me. It really never has been. Even when the movie's been around for, 14 years now, it's like, I'm sorry, saying fucking hi, "Oh, hi, Mark" is not the height of hilarity to me. So I get no joy out of The Room whatsoever. I really, really don't. At all. So that's how I felt going into The Disaster Artist. I just find it absolutely painful in all the wrong ways. So with that said, I was hearing about, I was curious how it was going to go down because I knew that, like, Tommy and Greg were involved in it, and they have cameos as well. And so it was like, this is before I really knew Franco's take on the room, and it was like, so I assumed they're just going to, like, make fun of him, and this is going to be like a parody, practically. So it's like, how are they, but they, surely they wouldn't do that if they're involved. I've heard some people argue that there's a bit of exploitation going on with Wiseau and the way this movie is seen. And it might be a little bit conspiracy, but I get that standpoint. To where it's like putting him on the talk shows and all that, and just watching people bask in him being his weird self does seem a bit, exploitive and all that. But, I mean, he's a guy that loves people, so I'm sure he's getting a lot of joy out of it, so all the power to everything that's going on here, I guess. So, but then, once I realized how Franco really felt about The Room and Tommy as a person, it was like, then the Ed Wood comparison started coming out, which is like the most obvious and basic comparison to make. A bad director portrayed positively in a movie that turns out good or great, and just being like the ultimate case of irony. The fact that Franco is sure to get an Oscar nomination for playing Tommy Wiseau it's just all, this movie too I would throw the word surreal at, very easily. So, yes, and it begins, so once again, obviously, I'm a little thrown off at the beginning, because we start off and we have, like, all these people in comedy talking about The Room and the effect that it had on them, from Kristen Bell to Adam Scott to Keegan-Michael Key to Kevin Smith, all those people, Ike Barinholtz, and then it's like, so this is where you see the point of view the movie is coming from, so then it goes on, and immediately, for starters, we also know that I'm not a big Dave Franco fan, but the idea of the two of them working together, because the one thing, it starts off immediately in this scene, this acting scene, where we see Tommy being Tommy, and we see Greg being Greg basically wants to have the energy and passion that Tommy has, but he's too introverted to get there. So when Tommy comes down and does his streetcar thing, Greg, like, sees an opening here. Not just, like, hey, maybe this guy can get me places, but as this is a guy that understands what I want to do, and he's going for it. And this kind of beautiful friendship forms. Obviously, there's going to be some snags throughout the movie, because Tommy can apparently be a very difficult person. But yeah, for the most part, it does feel like, honestly, one of the most touching angles of this whole movie is the Tommy-Greg friendship. Like, all the Room stuff aside. And the fact that they're played by brothers, like, really, there's, like, a real connection there that really comes through, not just in real life, but through the characters. And it meshes really well. So I thought that was, and this is, like, their first movie working together, because they had intentionally avoided it for a while. And it really comes through in this, and really, really adds a very kind of special fraction to the movie that I feel like might not be getting as much attention as it probably should. It's definitely a huge strength in the movie, and definitely is the power behind the moments when they're making The Room itself. So I thought those went together really well. Now, in regards to Franco's performance itself, it's another one of those cases to where you're kind of like, okay, so he's imitating Tommy Wiseau, something people have been doing for 14 years. So it's like, how is an imitation of Tommy Wiseau going to be this critically acclaimed? Or this good, even? And you see, at first, the prosthetics are a bit off-putting. Where you kind of like, I mean, it's good that we can't really see Franco. You can tell in his eyes, for sure, but the way they really tried, they didn't just throw a wig on him, like, they really tried to give him that unique facial structure that Wiseau has. And then, obviously, the voice comes out of him. And at first, yeah, it does feel like an imitation, because we've heard him mimicked so many times. But then as the movie goes on, and we kind of see how motivated he is by his passion for acting and creating, regardless of how bad at it he is, he makes it really come through in a genuine way. And there is, like, even the moment that really sets it off, after they leave the acting class and they go to the restaurant, and they do that scene with everybody around, and the way he brings Greg out of his shell, and we really can see, because when you just look at, like, random interviews with Tommy and Greg, or you see them separately, you're kind of like, how did these two even, like, how did this even happen? But then you watch this and you realize that it's really hard to tell. This is another thing that makes Franco's performance so impressive, is Franco has nothing to go on. Because with Greg, it's like, he's a guy that you can talk to, you can get information out of, you can take a bunch of stuff. The book, obviously, is his perspective. So it's like, Dave Franco had a whole bunch of stuff to work with to bring Greg to life on screen. Franco has what he has the surface. That's all he's got. He's got just watching Tommy be Tommy is pretty much all he has to work with, because he doesn't know what motivates him, where it comes from, because Tommy is just this being that exists. And there's no background, there's there hardly anything. So he basically has to use what little he has to bring out. And we talk about, like, he goes out there and he says, like, he created the room so that people would love each other and stuff like that. So it's like, you get, like, the vaguest idea where he comes from. It's a place of love and compassion and all that. But I mean, still, if you're gonna become this guy and do more than just an imitation, you got a lot of work on your hands, and Franco went to fucking work and really brought something out that I probably would not have been sure could have been, given all he had to work with. And he makes it funny without insulting him. He makes him this monster on set without making him completely and totally unlikable. And we see, like even when he goes to those moments where the audience could totally turn on him because he's being an asshole, and he's being childlike, he brings, like, a believable anger inside him, like how much he's been ridiculed, and the way knowing the way people see him, how there's definitely something inside this guy that's always saying everybody love everybody, that can be angry because of this kind of feedback that he gets from just trying to do what it is he wants to do. And yeah, the way Franco brings that to life is, yeah, it's really good stuff. And obviously directing himself too, like, it's all on him. I mean, it's hard to tell what was in the script. But I would say for the most part the performance is coming straight from Franco and Franco alone. Like I said, a lot of being around and studying Tommy in the best way you possibly can to get something out of him. So yeah, a lot of that works. There are moments that I find a bit distracting, that a lot of the supporting cast, like the people that are just here for 1 or 2 scenes and then leave, are like comedians that are very popular right now. It's like every time you turn a corner in this movie, it's some guy you recognize that you can't always name, but you know, oh yeah, they're the comedy guy that's in the background of a lot of movies. But, like, the whole background cast is made up of these guys. And while I do get it, there's such a connection to this movie and the comedy world for some reason, from the people that basically are talking about The Room in the opening to the cast of the movie. And so I thought that was, I mean, it's not like they're bad, like, they work fine, but it just really kept throwing me off every time a new scene brought forth new semi-recognizable faces. I think it's the fact that they all kind of come from they all seem to come from the same place in the comedy world is what threw me off. Like, obviously faces in the background you semi-recognize are a normal thing, but here it just kept throwing me off every time. But it would eventually find its footing, usually in mid-scene, once I got past that. But it's not just them. We also have Jackie Weaver playing the mother with breast cancer, who is constantly questioning all the choices her character has in this movie. And she has a really good moment when they're sitting at the lunch table and she's describing why she's doing this movie when she could be doing so many other things. That's a really nice moment to have in the middle of the movie and really brings kind of the whole meaning of it all into perspective. Then we have like Josh Hutcherson doing Denny, which is funny. Even funnier, Zac Efron as Chris R, I think they call him. That's probably one of the funniest scenes in the movie. That and Franco's delivery of Happy Birthday have to be the funniest things in the movie. In a movie that's very funny, more or less throughout. But once again, without being insulting, that's the important thing. And so, yeah. And as far as it goes in regards to, the word I keep seeing thrown at this a lot is inspirational. I assume they mean Tommy's drive is inspirational. And it's like, because I mean, if you look at it from the perspective, maybe this is just me being bitter, I don't know. But, it's like, you look at the fact that people think it's amazing that Tommy got the movie made. And they find that inspirational. But then at the same time, we learn in this movie that he apparently made it for $6 million, and his bank account is what the guy at the bank refers to as a bottomless pit. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, fucking anybody could make a movie with a bottomless pit of money. And it's like, and The Room clearly shows that. So, but if in regards to watching Tommy's passion, that I could see totally being inspirational. And the way Greg is motivated by that one person to bring himself out and get there. I understand it. And there are also plenty of moments here where, like especially the ending, where we know where this is headed, the premiere. So, this is to both of the Francos. It's the way that, he's able to make us, after we've seen him act the way he did on set, where he says that he's trying to do the Kubrick Hitchcock thing, where he's intentionally mean to them to get their performances out. But it just ends up turning into him being a dick, basically. But then we see him watch the movie and the reaction, and it really becomes heartbreaking, because we know where all the passion came from. And then the way it's able to shift and the ending goes from sad almost instantly to uplifting, was really well handled. That's something that could have just been all over the place, but he just really bounced it and made it feel like it was exactly within Tommy's character for the scene to go this direction. And that's what really makes it work. And there's just little funny things in there here and there, like the Bryan Cranston scene, or the number of days they're supposed to shoot exceeding. Yeah, as far as that goes, I like this movie a lot, and I think Franco really did a great job bringing forth why people do in fact love The Room. Some even unironically, believe it or not. Like, I think even Seth Rogen said he loves it unironically. But I mean, even so, I don't think I'll never be on that train, but I actually got pissed off watching the opening because of fucking Adam Scott. And it's like, I get it. Okay, I get it. People like The Room. I get it. And it's stood the test of time, sure. But Adam Scott says something that is absolute bullshit. If you remember, at the beginning, he says, people are still talking about The Room 14 years later. Do you think anybody is talking about the movie that won Best Picture 10 years ago? No, they're talking about The Room. Well, Adam Scott, I hate to break it to you. The movie that won Best Picture 10 years ago was No Country for Old Men. So, I don't think that's doing The Room any favors by saying that. And you can say, well, this movie was rumored to be coming out last year, so maybe they shot this in 2016. And it's like, okay, what won Best Picture 10 years before 2016? The Departed. Point being, shut the fuck up, Adam Scott. You're not doing The Room any favors. So, that's the extent of how I feel about that. So, speaking of unpopular opinions, I'd like to talk about I, Tonya. So, I, Tonya has been getting a lot of acclaim, particularly for its performances from Margot Robbie and Allison Janney. Allison Janney's winning a lot of critics awards. Margot Robbie's getting so much praise. They've already got their Globe nominations, their SAG nominations. Everybody's loving this thing. Everybody that sees it's like, oh my god, it was so great. Margot Robbie's a revelation. Oh my god, Allison Janney, so transformative. So, and everything, it's being built up as funny and daring and biting and all that. And I really think I saw a different movie. Like, there is no possible way me and all these other people saw the same movie. It's impossible. Because, let me tell you what I saw. Actually, let's just start right from the very opening. A very easy scene to compare the opening to would be, in the interview style, would be the very opening scene of The Fighter. You remember when the very first thing we see on the screen in The Fighter is Bale sitting there, and he's like, you know, really drugged out, and he's getting ready to do his interview, and he's like really thin and shit, and he's talking, and it's like the very second we see Christian Bale in The Fighter, in this moment, Bale is gone. The performance has taken over. This is Dickie Eklund we're looking at. And it's just instant. The instant sight of Bale, he's gone. And they attempt this exact same opening with Margot Robbie in I, Tonya. And it's her sitting there waiting to be interviewed. And just something about this did not hit me in the Bale way at all. The second you see Margot Robbie sitting here, and the filmmakers themselves are doing her no favors, this whole setup was just so blatantly obvious from the get-go. And so the second I lay eyes on Margot Robbie, I feel like she's looking right at me and screaming at me about how transformative this performance is. And how, oh my god, Margot Robbie's not here, this is all Tonya Harding. And she's gonna be, you know, sassy, straightforward, in our faces, telling it like it is. And just, I felt beaten over the head by this performance the second it was on screen, and not in a positive way. Like, you can see every wheel turning, every single tick, everything that says this performance is going to be so praised. And I just did not buy it for a second. I think Margot Robbie is really talented, and I like the fact that she has shown she can do a lot of different characters, and she's not just a pretty face to look at. But this performance doesn't work for me. On a technical level, I can get it. Like, there's a scene towards the end when she's just putting her makeup on, and then she's looking into the camera, and she's got, like, the one tear. And it was like, technically, I get it. But it actually was so technical, it was annoying me. Because it was like, well, I'll bet everybody's just praising the fuck out of this, because it's like, look how internalized it is. I don't see fucking anything internalized. Her looking into the camera... Just looking into the camera with the one tear feels over the top, because this is such a in-your-damn-face transformation. And in the same, unfortunately, because I was pulling for her because she's done so much good work for so long. It's the same thing with Allison Janney, too. The second she's on screen, she looks like she's right out of Grey Gardens, and it's like, she's doing a thing where it's like, she's supposed to have completely been taken over by this character, and she's, you know, saying fuck and cunt constantly, and she's being real tough. She's pushing young Tonya out of her chairs, telling everybody to fuck off. There's the moment when she shows off how rebellious and sassy and not give a fuck she is by being at the rink, and she's smoking, and Julianne Nicholson comes over and says, there's no smoking here. We need you to put that out. And she says, don't worry, I'll smoke it quietly. It's like, and then, it took a second for that line to register in my head. It was like, wait a minute. Was that supposed to be some clever fuck you to Julianne Nicholson for asking to put her cigarette out? What kind of answer is that? Because it didn't come off as particularly fuck the world or particularly clever. It was just this character is standoffish in a very blatant way. And it's just certainly no McDormand in 3 Billboards. Not even fucking close. I know that's like the kind of fuck off vibe, it seems to be, obviously not directly because the movies like came out simultaneously, but that's not what I'm saying. But that vibe, I believe, is what they were going for, and just everything feels so forced and so fake and so acting with a capital A, as they call it. And it's like these people are supposed to be real. These are real events. They should be these natural people, and yeah, maybe these are the way the people actually were. Where it's like you think Bale's over the top in the fighter, but you see footage of Dickie Echo and you're like, wow, Bale toned it down. And it's like, it's probably the same thing with this, but it's like, at least as over the top as it was, as performances like this can be, a lot of times they can be really believable. And there is nothing believable whatsoever here. And maybe the idea is to go for the whole over-the-top nature, the way they do the obvious bullshit, like the breaking the fourth wall suddenly out of nowhere. It's all kind of supposed to have this big, over-the-top, going-for-it feel. But everything just feels so fucking premeditated in all the wrong ways. And it's... Yeah, and so, this is how I feel like 15 minutes in, and the movie is a full 2 hours. You could probably imagine it didn't get much better for me. And it continued on, and then we eventually introduce Sebastian Stan as her abusive boyfriend turned husband. And this is about... I mean, I get it. I get how abusive relationships work. And how a lot of the times... women or men will be abused by their partner, yet still, just because the shit is so in their head and has fucked it up, that they keep going back. And that's pretty much the way it works. And the thing here is that the movie, the entire first hour of the movie, the entire first half of the movie is this. And it starts to make the movie very redundant. And it starts, even though it's a realistic thing, we know this is how the story went, it becomes very grating. Watching her go back and forth over and over and over again, when we're just waiting for the peak story point to happen. After a while, it felt less like a realistic portrayal of an abusive relationship and started to feel like filler, which is a really terrible place to be when you're portraying an abusive relationship, because it's like, you're doing it all right technically, but it's not coming through in any effective way whatsoever. It also doesn't help that the casting of Sebastian Stan feels really redundant, because he was also basically the antagonist in The Bronze, another really shitty movie about a sport that's female dominant. So that in itself just felt like, when you're retreading The Bronze, I doubt you saw it. Fucking don't, please. Don't encourage them. And that was the same kind of thing here, too, where it's like they're trying so hard, so incredibly hard to be vulgar and profane and, like, all up in your face about that shit, to give it, like, the movie some attitude or personality or whatever, and it's like, they are just so... It just feels so... That's it. That's all it is. It's trying so fucking hard to no effect whatsoever. And it's fucking painful. It really is, for a long-ass time, too. And it doesn't help that while all this shit is going on... Oh, there's also a bunch of the regular cliches. Like, with Tonya supposedly being this character that's such a hard-ass and all that, and such a unique character, that this movie's gonna really turn this genre on its head, the biopic genre, the sport genre, whatever, gonna turn it on its head because it's a vulgar woman at the center of it. Yeah, we actually get the same goddamn cliche scene where Sebastian Stan is working underneath the hood of a truck, and he can't seem to get it started, so here comes hard-ass, tough, unladylike Tonya to show him how it's done while he looks on, as if he's impressed and threatened, because women don't do that. That's car shit. That's guy shit. Women don't do that. She's really turning everything around. It all feels, yeah. But then, if that's not enough, if it's not grating enough, this is one of those movies with a constant soundtrack. Constant. And there is, like, constant pointless soundtracks seem to follow Margot Robbie around, right? But here, it's as bad as it's ever been. This, I would take the pointless, unnecessary soundtrack to the scenes that it doesn't fit in Suicide Squad over the pointless, endless soundtrack that don't fit the scenes that it's in I, Tonya. Another damn movie. Another damn movie with Spirit in the Sky in it. For God's fucking sake, can we retire that song in movies? But then, there's another song, which was put to use earlier this year, incredibly, which was, The Chain by Fleetwood Mac, that was used so well in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Well, I, Tonya got a hold of The Chain as well. And it plays through like 3 or 4 different scenes in its entirety, and long after it's lost any small bit of relevance it had to the scene it's playing under, it just keeps going and going and going into other scenes. I guess because it's almost like the sound editor put it in, and then forgot to make it fade out at the right point, so it just plays all the way through, through scenes where it doesn't even need music anymore. But they bought the rights, so let's put it to use, why not? And it feels like, and on that too, where it's really desperately trying to give itself personality with the vulgarity and the soundtrack and the breaking the fourth wall and that stupid interview setup, it's basically, it really doesn't have much of a flow. Like I said, the first hour is really redundant in regards to their relationship. Then the second half with the crime of it all. But the editing really, really wants you to believe this movie has a flow, because it goes from scene to where it's like, they really, like, this movie seems to think it's really damn clever with its editing, and the way scenes flow into one thing and another, the way, you know, the narration breaks the fourth. They'll be in a scene and narrating, and then suddenly, in the scene they're narrating, they start speaking the narration to us. It's annoying as fuck. This entire movie is annoying as fuck. It really is. Because, all of this said, it's kind of like, so what exactly does it want to be? Because if it's trying, the scenes where it's like, actually feels like it's starting to try to get super serious, there is no investment whatsoever by that point, so that's out the window. But then it's like, okay, so clearly it's trying to be some dark comedy, but it's like, this movie is not sly enough, not clever enough to be a dark comedy, at least effectively. In genre, okay. Like, if you want to categorize it, fine. But in effect, nothing. Not there at all. And so when we finally do get to the crime aspect, do you know what it comes off a lot like? Is, like, American Crime Story. Like, Ryan Murphy got a hold of it. It feels so much like some kind of scrapped pilot for another season of American Crime Story, only they piled the whole story into a 2-hour episode. That's exactly what it feels like. And because the camp is there, and the over-the-top performances are there, but there's one thing, is something like The People vs. O.J. Simpson, which I loved, still, its camp made it very entertaining. And the very theatrical performances, once again, not only were they entertaining, but some of them are legitimately good performances, sometimes great performances. And that's not the feel I get from I, Tonya. The camp is there, but not the entertaining factor. The over-the-top performances are there, but not the quality. So, yeah, this movie just kept falling and falling and falling. But, like I said, I guess from a technical level, technically it's well made. Technically the performances are good. But I got nothing from it. Nothing at all. So, once again, I'm not sure what movie I saw, but it seems to be a totally different one from the one everyone else saw. So, that's the way it works, though. I suppose it's kind of a nice change of pace, because it's like, you watch all these award season movies and you're like, yeah, that was good. Didn't quite live up to the hype, but it was alright. Or it's like, yeah, that was actually pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. And it's like, yeah, there's a movie this year that people love that I just cannot fucking stand. So, there that is. With all that said, with all this award stuff out of the way, let's go into Jumanji real quick. Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle is the full title. because we're kind of doing a different setup here. We're kind of doing a reverse setup here from the original movie. Dwayne Johnson tried to make it abundantly clear a long time ago that this was not a reboot, not a remake, nothing like that. That it was in the same universe as the first movie because they wanted to, they didn't want to like taint Robin Williams' legacy by trying to start it from scratch, was what I'd heard. So, Dwayne Johnson, I'm sure he's a reliable source in this. So, and it does begin, they're not in a different country, but the game is on a beach where we left it at the last scene of the movie, the first movie. And then we get a bit of a setup there, but then we go into this whole video game thing that just kind of drops from out of the sky. So, now Jumanji is a video game that they go inside to. But they do this interesting twist on it a little bit where instead of just playing the game as is, when they go inside the game, they become their avatars, or their game pieces if you want to talk board games. And that in itself is an interesting twist on this whole setup. It's very... They pretty much do every single thing you can think of that's already been done with the body switching angle. But for this Jumanji setup, it's a decent way to, you know, shake it up a little bit. So, before this, though, we do get introduced to the 4 characters as they are as high schoolers. Mainly the nerdy, introverted kid who is Alex Wolff. The brother who I don't mind, he was one of the bad guys in Patriots Day, so I didn't mind him. He's certainly much better than the Antichrist that is his brother. So, the 4 of them are introduced, and for the most part, there's not a whole lot of character here. At all. I don't know if the idea is that they're all a different type, because they're all gonna be... Because this has to coincide with the characters that they portray in the game, whether they fit them or whether they're the exact opposite. That might sound better than it's executed, but the idea is there at least. So we're introduced, and obviously we've got the big tough guy, we've got the introverted nerd type guy, that's everybody pushing him around. We've got Selfie Girl, and we've got Ali Sheedy in the Breakfast Club. So, and you know things are not going to particularly be that insightful in regards to these characters, particularly when we get, I think her name was Bethany, Selfie Girl, her introduction. Like, we get Fridge's introduction, the big guy, and we get a vibe of what he's like, kind of where he comes from. Like, we see him at home, and then he goes to school, and we get an idea of what introverted kid's going to be like. They're very basic character types, but we get it. But then there's Bethany. Bethany's full-on character introduction is her taking a selfie of herself. It's its own scene, her entire introduction. And you would think maybe it's like, you know, maybe they're ribbing the generation, the selfie generation, where this is all they do, so this is going to be all her character is. That works as a joke for like a minute, but she's one of the major characters, so... and even when she's Jack Black, they don't let up on that at all. So you have to deal with that. And obviously, our Ali Sheedy and the Breakfast Club girl is going to be just that. Nothing else. When she and being in Karen Gillan's body is not going to help her either. Except that, oh, she can kick ass now. But there's no... We're throwing character out the window. But you're probably asking me, why are you so focused on character? It's Jumanji. Well, my instinct is to keep comparing it to the other movie, which actually has great character work in it, especially from Robin Williams' angle. But if you want to say, come on, it's a movie with Dwayne Johnson, Jack Black, and Kevin Hart inside a video game with their bodies inhabited by teenagers. And Jack Black's is a selfie-loving girl, teenage girl. So it's like, what exactly are you worried about the characters for? Just watch this shit play out. So it's like, if you insist I'd be dismissive, okay, we'll see what happens. It's not that kind of movie. Alright, let's see it as an adventure movie. Because adventure movie and Dwayne Johnson really go well together One of the better adventure movies out there, at least for the past couple of decades, is The Rundown. The Rundown is so good, and so exciting and fun. But we have this, and we've got a nice introduction here. The way they play up the game, the characters inside the game, where they only have so much they can say, and they're just kind of monotonous and just doing their jobs. Reese Darby. The second I saw Reese Darby pull up in that Jeep, I was so happy because he always brings the comedy in one form or another. Like over a year later, I'm probably still laughing till I cry at him and Hunt for the Wilder People. So we go on after we pass our teenage pandering dialogue, that style of humor that's like saying something and then when somebody doesn't get it, you have that, oh, never mind way about it. Like, you know what, never mind kind of way. You know exactly the kind of humor I'm talking about that's in all these goddamn movies. And it only seems to be increasing as we go on. After we get past all that and we end up inside the game, there's a bit going on in regards to like introduction. Like Bobby Cannavale in this movie plays one of the most useless villains probably in movie history. Bobby Cannavale is the main villain. I think his name was even Van Pelt, which obviously takes us back to the original. And he is barely in this whatsoever. Maybe it's like, okay, like there are so many problems with this movie that I'm sure people could easily defend by saying it's because they're in a video game. Like, you could say Bobby Cannavale is barely in this movie as the villain, but you could say, well, it's because when you're playing a video game, the villain only shows up when he's going to do villain shit. Okay. I suppose that argument works, except for the fact that that means every time Bobby Cannavale shows up, there is no real feel about it. He's just there. Our main antagonist is just there whenever he shows up. And he's played by Bobby Cannavale. Did you see Season 3 of Boardwalk Empire? He is an amazing villain. And here, nothing. They give him fucking nothing. And we go on, and we do the whole body switching thing becomes very apparent very quickly. We've got the virginal teen in Dwayne Johnson's rock hard body. We've got a guy who's really big in little small Kevin Hart's body. We've got, attractive teenage girl in Jack Black's body. And we've got, introverted girl in an ass kicker body. And the jokes right there have written themselves, and we never stray away from them. And they just go on this. And the main problem I have with this, like, The Rock doing his being the introverted teen was okay, because he didn't overdo it. It was there, and he used it in the right moments, and made it funny whenever that would come to be, whenever that would be a problem for him, because it wasn't constant. It was only when a situation would happen to make him act like that. And it's funny, yeah, it is inherently funny to see a dude that looks like Dwayne Johnson acting like that. I mean, Kevin Hart is surprisingly toned down when you look at some of his other movies in this. Like, you look at Ride Along or something, or Grudge Match, God forbid, and it's like he's slowly getting the idea that he needs to tone it down a little bit. So he's getting there. He has some funny deliveries like that. Like, just his very blunt delivery of "Cake Makes Me Explode" was really funny. But then you have a performance I didn't really care for in this was Jack Black. Jack Black, who I normally love, by the way. But here, I just thought there was so much wrong with what was going on here, because the funny thing is that it is a thin teenage girl who's obsessed with her appearance in Jack Black's body. There's definitely a funny premise here, but the thing is that what Jack Black is doing here is he is basically the whole idea. Like, if you look at the other characters, like the nerdy kid has Dwayne Johnson's voice, like that authoritative voice that he has, and he gets to do like, the suave guy kind of thing that kind of throws them off. Like, he does it at will because of the way the game is set up. And then we've got this big dude with a kind of a deep voice having the, meek, mousy Kevin Hart voice. But what Jack Black is doing here is it's like Jack Black is trying to make himself sound like a girl. And like, he changes the pitch in his voice. And it's like, Jack Black, that's not really the joke. The joke would be if this girl was talking in your voice. And I know you don't necessarily have this... I mean, yeah, Jack Black's voice does have a high pitch to it, but he's got that, like, feminine kind of affection on it. And that's... It felt a lot more like he was just kind of doing, like... Yeah, it's like an impression of a girl as opposed to just a female character that's stuck in this body. And it's like, you really didn't have to do that much. I mean, I understand you don't want to sleepwalk through it, especially when you don't have the energy that Jack Black has, but this was not the way to go. I mean, there are some funny moments, like when he's teaching Karen Gillan to be seductive. Even though it's funny that first go-around, they ruin it with the whole, making it a whole montage thing. Like, the first go-around was funny, and it could have been left at that, and we could have moved on. But no, this movie is 2 hours, so let's do all of this. Let's do all the possible comedic points here. So that can get kind of tired. And there are moments where there's, like... I mean, once again, I don't want to spend it comparing it to the original movie, but it's like, you do have moments like, when you think about the whole thing of, like, every time the story in the first movie needed a turn, there was a rule that they fucked up, or a rule that got in the way. And that was really there to kind of shake things up a little bit. And it's like, here there doesn't really seem to be rules in place. It seems like they can just do whatever they want, more or less. It's just, the one hang-up here is that they have a certain amount of lives, which is a decent way to bring that, bring an obstacle into this, even because it just kind of seems like we're going from thing to thing here. Because each time the game in the original movie brought something out, there was a whole new obstacle. And it's like, this game does not feel like an obstacle course. It doesn't feel like it has multiple levels. Things don't necessarily increase as they go, or get more extreme. That was the great thing about the first movie, was the things got worse and worse and worse until there was a flood and the house broke in half. And it was like, and it got really extreme. And here, there's not that build-up. It's just kind of one set piece to another, and it's just dealing with a snake, dealing with guys on bikes. There are obvious CGI animals. Once again, CGI animals you can maybe throw into, well, yeah, they're in a video game, so they look animated, but it's kind of like, yeah, but everything else is real, though, so I don't know if that works. But they do have that one callback where it's, for some reason a Jonas Brother is in this movie to attract attention to it, I guess. To get that smaller demographic in there, but, younger demographic in there. So whatever. But, and he's in a tree house that Alan Parrish carved his name into and built. So it's like, this is the same, obviously this was the same jungle that Alan was banished into for that 26 years or whatever. And then that occurs, you start thinking about the rules of the universe, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, so all 26 years in the real world was wiped out, but everything in the jungle is still the same. Interesting. Okay. And we buy that. There's not a problem. But then it's just, when we are bringing up questions about how the two worlds are together, it's gone fleetingly, because now we have to follow a Jonas Brother around and do the same thing we've been doing, just with a Jonas Brother now. So, whatever. There's, weirdly enough, there's not a lot of adventure in it. And the adventure that is there does feel pretty generic, more or less. Like, people are really praising this movie. I don't think I've ever seen the word fun in my life more than I have hearing people talk about this movie. I know it gets to a point where when you hear it from critics, it's like when you look at critics, you have never heard a word more condescending than the word fun. And here, I suppose I get where people are getting that vibe, but I mean, it's not the adventure level of something like The Rundown or something. And it's like, just because it's a big set piece doesn't necessarily make it more exciting than the last one. It just kind of goes from scene to scene until we kind of force ourselves into a climax that just kind of, well, we're here now. Kind of looked like close to where the climax took place in Predators. It's like almost like the same set or something. But I say that, and it does seem like they're less focused on the adventure aspect and more focused on how many jokes can we get out of the body switching thing. But with all these criticisms said, I do commend it for just doing its own thing. Being a movie with the Jumanji name and taking on a whole new concept while not trying to, making sure it doesn't call itself a reboot or a remake. Um, I feel like there was a lot of respect behind this movie. Jake Kasdan directed it. That's random as hell. Uh, and and it's always like, despite its missteps, there's always kind of a likable quality to it, and the way the characters mesh together, and the way the cast works really well together. Um, like Karen Gillan, for instance, I often cited as one of the worst actresses working today, but she really won me over because I really loved Nebula in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and that was kind of like, oh, maybe there's something to Karen Gillan now. And then I rewatched Oculus, and I didn't hate her near as much as I did the first time. And it was like, okay, so she's starting to grow on me a little bit. Um, and the four cast members here, really work well together, regardless of some of the over-the-top types they're playing. And even though I say there's a lack of adventure, and it doesn't feel like the action scenes are that up to par, and it doesn't necessarily feel like the stakes increase or anything, it does have a constant energy to it that pulls you in. And so that goes a long way, even if you're not necessarily. It's not the most quality of scenes as individuals, but the fact that they keep that energy up, even when it's not an action scene, yeah, it does go a long way. So, and the fact that the cast seems to really be willing to go for it in regards to going into these characters and playing it off like they're not actually the characters they would normally play, because they've got these opposites of them inside them. Once again, very obvious setup, but they really work with it in a way that is easily watchable, if I if I can say that without once again sounding too condescending. So yeah, that's what that was. It's fine. I'm a little surprised by the acclaim, but it's fine. So that's what we have here. The next thing you're gonna get is the worst movies of the year video. Yeah, as well as our we're gonna do Golden Globe predictions podcast thing Sunday morning, but I'm sure he's already informed you of that. So that's what we're looking at. And yes, I will get back when first of the year comes back around. I will go back into verses. I know somebody suggested, I think it was the same guy actually, suggested Dog Day Afternoon. So I'm probably gonna do Dog Day Afternoon with Inside Man. I think that's probably the closest I can get. And I have a couple of others planned as well. We're not going to leave Pacino territory here. We're going to stay with Pacino a little longer. So that's what Versus is doing if you're into that. So yes, until all that stuff and until we get a bit more awards movies coming this way, for now, that's